Hey guys, Navin on No Limit Hold'em with the exciting conclusion of the overpowered poker pre-flop section. So this is going to be a final word on open raising ranges and some thoughts on flatting and three betting, along with ISO raise ranges and overlimping ranges. So the very basics are going to be pre-flop poker can be seen as a battle over the blinds and the antes, or the blinds and or antes. But it's really not a complete picture. It's not the complete picture that sort of the old school advocates of the circa 2004 to 2000 X players and theorists might want you to believe, because this is a table stakes game and that matters. It's not just about express odds. It's about express odds and implied odds. The bottom of our range should be such that it adds value to the rest of our range, and the top of our range should be such that it gives the bottom of our range fold equity. Selecting hands based mostly on the four fundamental factors and using those secondary factors we discussed to widen ranges and to be the deciding factor when there's a close decision. Larger raise sizing and tighter ranges go together, whereas wider ranges with smaller sizing go together for reasons we've already discussed and we'll get back into a little bit. And again, table stakes matters. The fact that you're playing, you can't really break out money from your wallet in the middle of the hand or like put your family's estate on the table matters. Express odds is not the entire story. There's implied odds, there's equity versus ranges, and implied odds and reverse implied odds, and that is the entire story. So what we really need to know, we need to have good default ranges for opening and continuing, good 3-bet ranges, and we construct those in and out of position based on the relevant table dynamics, and overlimp ranges when people are going to let us get away with that. And then ISO raise ranges. The ISO raise ranges and sizing will be based on table dynamics, stack depth, and your opponent's mistake propensities. The overlimp ranges, we have to remember that when we have good implied odds, our fold equity won't be so good, and vice versa. And if we don't have to worry so much about having a face-up range, then overlimp ranges can make a lot of sense. So when we're opening, our open ranges should be linear, our sizing should relate to the width of the range so that we don't turn the middle of our range into bluffs or the bottom into value raises. Flat versus opens, our equity versus the open range, adjusted for implied and reverse implied odds, and then compared to the pot odds, while taking into account the other players that are active and how often they're going to overcall or squeeze when we don't close the action pre-flop. This is kind of the difference between ISO raise ranges and overlimp ranges. When we ISO raise, we're looking at fold equity, showdown value, and our domination. When we overlimp, we should be looking and thinking more in terms of nut potential and synergy for good implied odds. We open linear ranges where the bottom of our breaking range, the bottom of our range should break about even, but we're gonna use those or add those hands to our range in order to add value to the rest of our range in the form of board coverage and just not being face up. We want the middle of our range to be about as happy to get the flat call as the blind snatch, so we should be kind of indifferent with the middle hands in our range between getting it through and not. We want to get action with the best hands in our range, and we should adjust our ranges and bet sizing together. One doesn't cause the other. There's not this time aspect in the game space of No Limit Hold'em poker strategy. They just sort of go together. And here are some sample ranges. At under the gun 6 max small stakes online, deuces plus, ace-2 suited through ace-5 suited. We skip ace-6 and ace-7 suited. Then I like to open ace-8 suited plus, king-queen, offsuit or suited, king-jack suited or offsuit, king-queen suited only, ace-10 plus, jack-10 suited, 9-8 suited, 7-6 suited, and I want to go 3 times the big blind. Now the bottom of this range is going to be like King Jack offsuit, Ace 10 offsuit, 9-8 suited, 7-6 suited. Those hands can be taken off in a lot of situations, but as a pure default, I think it's good to have 7-6 suited in our range because we don't have Ace 6 suited or Ace 7 suited, remember. So we benefit a lot from having this hand in our range because of the board coverage. And we don't have a lot of other hands that are going to have a 9 or an 8 in them also, so 9-8 suited is going to cover a lot of boards that some of our other hands in our range will not cover. And I think if we're opening Queen 10 suited, we don't need to open Jack 10 suited, but we should probably be opening like either Queen 10 suited, 9-8 suited, Queen Jack suited and offsuit. We should have enough of these hands in the middle, but not too many. And if you want to construct your range just a little bit different, probably not going to be a big deal, as long as we just keep these things in mind. In a live $2, $5 no limit hold'em cash game, 7s plus, King Queen suited, Ace Jack suited, Ace Queen offsuit plus. Those are the hands I open. And this is when I am able to, or have to, however you want to look at it, I am opening 4.5 times the big blind. Then I'm opening really tight. Now if I'm at a table where I can get away with cheaper steals, and or I guess if I can get away with cheaper steals, it also means I'm not going to get called very often if I open 4.5 times the big blind. So if we're going to adjust with a lower sizing, then we should also open and widen our range. Again, these things go together. For all the reasons we've talked about, we don't want to end up turning the bottom of our range into a value raise, and we don't want to turn it into an outright minus EV open. And that's going to have to do with basic bet theory, where the bigger you raise, the stronger your opponent's continuing ranges are going to be, but the more fold equity you have. And so that's why you get this relationship where the bigger you raise, the tighter your range should be. The wider you open, the smaller your raise should be. Again, one does not cause the other, they simply go together. Button, open, full ring, single table, online, sit and go. 2s plus, any ace. King 8 suited plus, King 10 offsuit or suited, Queen suited plus, Queen 9 offsuit, Queen 9 suited, Jack 10, either suited or offsuit, Jack 9 suited, Jack 8 suited, 10 8 suited, 9 8 suited, 8 7 suited, 7 6 suited, 6 5 suited, 5 4 suited, 10 8 suited, 9 7 suited, and this is for 2.5 times the big blind. If we can / have to or want to and are able to go bigger with our open raise size, then we want to go tighter with our range. If we can go smaller, like 2 times the big blind, we can open a little bit wider. And 6 max online from the button, our open range should be the same as above. And that's an important concept because since we are guaranteed to be in position, no one else is opened, we don't have to worry about going through a bunch of players. We're guaranteed to just have to go through 2 players that both not only have to play out of position but realize they have to play out of position. There's no reason for us to have vastly different ranges when we are playing in a 6 max online game, or for opening the button full ring in a single table sit and go online, assuming the depth is approximately the same or something close, you know. And just some final thoughts. Open ranges that have enough value at the top to prefer calls. So that maybe like the top X%, maybe the top third of your open raising range, although I haven't put that through Equilab or Flopzilla or anything. So, I mean, maybe not necessarily the top 33.3%, but the top, if you chop your range into 3 chunks, the top chunk is value. And that means you prefer calls. And you should have enough hands at the bottom, or you should have enough hands that the bottom of your range is actually going to lose a little bit when called, because sometimes you're going to take the blinds down, and you should be breaking about even with the bottom hands in your range. If you're not, then you're not opening enough hands. You should be opening wider, because if you're not breaking about even with the bottom of your range, that necessarily means you could be opening more hands. And the hands that you are opening should be all of the hands that are going to make money And so the cutoff ought to be something like the bottom of each part, like each type of hand, the worst of each type of hand that is going to approximately break even or make just a little bit as an open. And since some of that value is going to come from taking the blinds down uncontested, then it means that when we get called, we're going to lose a little bit. The middle parts don't have a preference between getting called or not, although they could have a preference between getting one or multiple callers, and they could very well be in a spot where they don't want to face a 3-bet, but this should only be the case, and it's only okay for this to be the case, if either we're doing something exploitative or we've built in hands and side of our, well, sub-ranges that we're going to use to come back over the top and 4-bet, and we're going to have hands that call in such a way that we stop our opponents from auto-profiting by 3-betting us with any 2 cards. 3-bet ranges should be polarized when you can be, and definitely if you're going to have a flatting range, then you ought to be polarized and have to be polarized with your 3-bet range. If you don't have a flatting range, then you don't have anything to polarize. There's no reason to polarize if you're not going to have a calling range. If you expect your opponents to call more often than they raise, then you probably want to go linear, either exploitatively or because it's the nature of the situation. You should be linear, or have to be linear, when you don't want a flat calling range. You should typically ISO raise hands that have good showdown value and domination, and that are going to hit flops fairly often, so you're going to have like decent frequent strength. You're going to have hands that flop well in that they hit a lot of flops and make it decent or good hands fairly often, and or when your fold equity is high, or if it will be after the flop with a continuation bet where you're going to be like up against a very fit or fold villain. It can make a lot of sense to widen your ISO raising range. If your opponent's going to limp fold a lot, or if he's going to limp call a lot but play very fit or fold post flop, but you should tend to overlimp in situations where your implied odds are good, because there is this reverse correlation between implied odds and fold equity. Overlimp hands when your implied odds are good. Think in terms of nut potential and synergy for selecting those overlimping hands. Overlimp hands, or tend to overlimp hands, where if you were to raise, you're kind of turning a perfectly good implied odds hand into a bluff where you're going to be in a lot of trouble by the hands that call you, because you're going to be dominated more often than you dominate, and you're not going to hit enough flops really hard to make up for the fact that you're putting all this money in preflop, or putting the money in preflop just doesn't help you very much. Like if it's an implied odds situation where you don't have a lot of fold equity, then oftentimes ISO raising is just going to be putting more money in that you don't need to, and it's just going to be diminishing the overall implied odds of the situation. And a nice thing to remember, and this is something that just kind of happens to work out well, is that the same kinds of hands that want to go multi-way are the same kinds of hands that want a low investment and a high stack to pot ratio post flop, whereas the same kinds of hands that usually prefer a small stack to pot ratio are also the hands that prefer to play heads up. And that's good, because exactly what we do to create the situations is the same. Like if we overlimp, that keeps the initial investment lower, which increases our implied odds, and it also keeps the stack to pot ratio higher, and it also does not deter opponents from coming in behind us, and may even make people either incentivized or feel incentivized to overcall. So you're going to find yourself in a multi-way situation, which is fine, again, because overlimping hands with like good implied odds, like if you're going to nut mine, set mine, or take a flop with like synergistic combos like suited connectors, some of your ace X suiteds, especially the ace wheel and ace Broadway suiteds. Those things all kind of lend themselves to the same idea. But your hands with like So like we're talking pocket pairs, some of your suited connectors, some of your ace-x suited. These hands are going to play well in with a small investment pre-flop. They're going to play well with a large stack to pot ratio post-flop, and they don't mind players coming in and forming a multi-way situation. So those are all good reasons to not really do a lot of ISO raising. Whereas if you're in a situation where you have a hand like King Jack offsuit against a limp, well, King Jack offsuit does not want a lot of players coming in. It would prefer to be heads up. It's got good blockers, so it could have some good fold equity. It prefers a smaller or lower stack to pot ratio post flop. It's going to dominate a lot of its opponents that are going to limp and call very often. And all of those things mean the same thing. They all lend themselves to ISO raising instead of over limping. So I think that is really all I wanted to say about pre-flop for now. We're going to revisit a lot of these concepts when we start marrying pre-flop to post-flop, especially with regard to continuation betting. But until then, Navanad over and out. Good quote, Luck, end quote.